From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. It's the beginning of a new school year here in Nashville, and it appears there'll also be a continuation of the seeming ongoing political controversy that surrounds our Metro School Board and public schools in general in this area. To talk about what's going on and what it means, we've asked Steve Cavendish, the news editor of the Nashville Scene, Nashville Post, to join us today, along with the education beat writer for the Tennessean, Joey Garrison. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Pat.
Now, there were a lot of developments this past week, beginning with the news that, based on new test scores from the state, the number of schools in Metro on the list of the bottom 5% in the state, they call them priority schools, has doubled in the last 2 years. Now, Steve, is that as ominous a figure and disturbing as it sounds?
It is a little. I mean, it's certainly not great news that you want to hear. Some of this is kind of how it's being shaken out in terms of testing and kind of realigning different tests with Common Core and other standards. But I mean, I don't think you can look at that number as anything other than not good.
And Joey, what does it mean to the teachers and the students and the parents that are a part of those schools being placed on that list? Does that mean they're going to be taken over by the state? Are they going to become charter schools? What happens?
Well, in fact, it's actually almost tripled from 6 to 15 today, and as what they call those bottom 5% schools in the whole state, an entity called the Achievement School District now has jurisdiction to take them over. Now, I talked to Chris Barbick, the head of the ASD, about a month ago, and what he said then was they're looking at maybe 3 to 5 school takeovers here in Nashville over the next 2 years. I think it's going to begin with one here next year, and we won't really know which school that is until the winter.
And they take them over. State takes them over, but Metro still pays for it.
Well, yeah, it'd be about 2/3 local dollars, and the state the state matching fund as well. But when I say takeover, what I really mean is them bringing in a charter school organization to run that school. That's what they've done in Memphis. They have 22 over there, 1 here, and now we're going to start looking at a slow expansion here in Nashville.
Steve, is it so possible some of these schools could get off the list before the takeover happens because they improve their scores this coming school year or the next school year?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure exactly what the takeover percentage is going to be.
Now, Dr. Register, Jesse Register, the schools director, says that he and his staff are going to take drastic actions. That's the quote he used to correct this situation. What does that mean, Steve?
Well, it was Dr. Register and his staff have certainly had trouble with these schools showing up. The problem now is they've had such a spate of good news that turning around in order to have to turn around these bottom schools is just not something they were prepared for.
Now, Joey, if you look over these 15 schools that are now on the list, they do have some things in common. Not all the same. Some of it's location, but a lot of it are the characteristics of poverty.
Well, most of them are about upwards of 95% federal free and reduced lunch population. Most are high concentrations of minority students, African American or Latino. And real quick, one thing I think Register is looking at is back in the spring, the school board approved a charter school, KIP, it's a national group, to eventually take over a low-performing school. So I'm expecting an announcement maybe in the coming weeks, coming months, to bring KIP into one of those. I think that'll all be in conversation with the state.
Now, Steve, for the first time on this list for Metro, a high school showed up, Pearl Cone. Does that mean anything? Did that just happen, or is that an indication of something else?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not good for Pearl Cone, and for a high school to show up on it should probably set off some alarm bells. The interesting thing is going to be the Metro has not had a ton of operators raising their hands in order to come in to do takeovers. Taking over a high school is a very tough sort of situation, so I imagine it's going to be a delicate thing trying to find someone to do that.
Now, Joey, Memphis leads the state with a number of these at-risk schools, but their numbers decreased by 10. Have they figured out something that we need to learn here in Nashville?
Went from 69 to 59, and that's sort of playing into this argument of a lot of charter advocates, and namely that group at the Achievement School District. They say that not necessarily the ASD schools over in Memphis are going from off the list, but creating this competition, this free market competition over in Memphis. They're sort of arguing that helped the results over there, and so I think That's sort of how it's played into a certain argument there.
Now, Steve, this information from the state has already sort of set off a round of recriminations at the school board. Will Pinkston sort of said that he's been going to school board meetings for the last 2 years and never heard a discussion about this. He's beginning to wonder if they have any kind of turnaround plan on this. This has not helped the discussion or the tone of the discussion at the board.
No, and to be quite honest, for a school board that's wanted to get away from charter issues and into other things, and if you ask virtually anybody on the school board, they'll tell you that they've spent an adverse amount of time in charter discussions over the last few years. I'm sure that this is something that they're not going to want to talk about.
Now, Joey, on a more positive note, the state also released figures this week on the top 5% of successful schools, both in terms of how much they increased their test scores and at the rate they increased them. And Nashville went from having 12 2 years ago to 18. So. Yeah. Does that show that there are some things going right in metro schools?
Yeah, if you break down that list, a lot of the schools, a lot of the zone schools are a couple in the sort of Hillsborough, Green Hills area, and there were some schools that hadn't been on there before. Antioch High School, one of them, Andrew Jackson Elementary. But it was a positive storyline for the charter schools. They had a great week, and we'll get to some of those reasons later. But 7 out of 18 charter schools, and again, this isn't necessarily for performance. It's also for something called value-added growth, showing student learning gains one year to the next. A lot of dispute about that particular metric, but it's indisputable. You got to say, charters in that particular metric are showing great results, great gains.
Steve, I believe you'll see in this, it was about a third of the schools now are charter schools that are on the high performing ones, and that's only out of about 19 schools that we have for charters right now. For a school board that wants to get into other discussions, that's not likely to lead us there, right? We're likely to spend even more time on charters going forward.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what charter applications come forward here in the next year and kind of how they approach them. If you're a charter advocate, certainly this was probably the best news that you could have, that you have a series of schools that are performing at a very high rate and that you're seeing real gains in classrooms. I mean, beyond whatever sort of philosophical charter debate there may be out there, these are real numbers.
So, Joey, what's the true or better snapshot of where metro schools are today? Is it this increase by more than double of the lowest performing schools, or the increase that we saw in the high performing schools, or does it just show what a mixed bag metro has in terms of where you go to school and maybe what part of town you live in?
I think it's the latter there. I mean, I think, and just a mixed bag and what a lot of data can show you. I mean, you can sort of run with all sorts of storylines. I mean, I think the truth is, and it's been the case in Davidson County for years, is you can either be zoned for a good school, a bad school, or you can either get into a good school. I mean, that's sort of why we continue to have a lot of interest in school board races, and we continue to look at this as we're trying to solve that. Figure out that answer.
Joey Garrison, the education writer for the Tennessean, is our guest today, along with Steve Cavendish, who's the news editor for both the Nashville Scene and Nashville Post. Back to continue our conversation with him on education issues here in Nashville after this break.